Hi everyone, welcome to the fifth session of Conformance Fridays. I'd like to start with our acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today. Here in Adelaide, I'm on Kaurna land. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend their respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We acknowledge the First Peoples as the first scientists, educators, and healers. I think we've seen our goals for quite some time. Basically, the plan is to prepare a proposal for the conformance requirements for the AU patient summary, and certainly, as an outcome of today, we would really like to have something that's drafted ready to put to the FAR working group next week. Not the working group, but the AUPS working group for next Friday's session. So we're really moving along on this one. I did say it was the second to last one. I'm assuming we will still do another one in a fortnight's time, but certainly moving this towards the working group next week, the wider group. So just to recap, last time we were considered some of the principles of AU patient summary must supports and obligations. We reviewed the definitions of AU patient summary producer and consumer actors, and we reviewed some of the conformance rules for those actors. So today what we're looking to do is continue along those lines. So there's been some work that's been done in the background as the actual patient summary implementation guide is in progress, being developed, that's being reviewed, and hence we're bringing that back to this group to confirm that those reviews. So we've got an additional principle that we talked about last time that we're going to have a look at. We're going to revisit those conformance rules with some of the edits that's been going on over the last couple of weeks. And then we're going to have a bit of a discussion about empty sections and perhaps missing and suppressed data. And as we go through, we'll start to get a bit of a preview of the obligations that are being put into the patient summary in a branch that Danielle's been working very hard over the last 24, 48 hours on. Okay, so these are the three principles that we looked at last week for must support and obligations. So basically that we are bringing in the AUPS profiles that must support, where the conformance obligations that satisfy the IPS profile expectations. And we're also bringing in the, so an AUPS profile may strengthen the IPS profile, so if we wanted to, and also downstream implementation guides can also strengthen those as further as it sees fit as well. So if you've got a company-based one or there's a national patient summary for the My Health record, for example, then they can apply additional stronger obligations if necessary. Weaker ones are not allowed. So as part of our discussions last week, we thought that there was a missing one that we needed to include in our principles. So this is where a profile referenced in the AUPS bundle is not defined in IPS, or when an IPS profile doesn't have must support, but we specify must support in AUPS, that the default obligations that we start with are shall populate if known for a producer, and consumer will be a shall handle and display. Now we can choose as part of the group to go stronger than that, but that's where we will start. So that's a base principle for the design of a UPS. Just keep in mind that these principles are actually not going to be part of the IG. It's more they are guiding principles for the working group. So that's what we're looking for. So is that any concerns with this additional principle, I guess, is the best way to start that conversation.
Landon here. No real concerns. I'm just curious about the should display. Was that inherited from IPS?
It is. Yep.
Okay. Does it ever mention what context that's in? Is that narrative or it's just very general?
Well,
It
so
is very general intentionally, yeah. It doesn't prescribe the method by which you make it visible to a reader.
Okay, thank you.
but keep in mind that these are on individual elements as well as at a section level,
Yes. Yeah.
as well as and at an entry level. So they propagate all the way through at a section level entry down to an individual element within a profile. So that's why it's up to you. All right. So whether you just do narrative at the section level, whether you construct it at the profile level, then you would be looking at what the individual shoulds within that profile.
Makes sense. Thank you.
That's certainly how I interpret it anyway. But
Heath, Vince here. I had an issue with the first of those statements in that if your privacy and security requirements don't allow that, how should that be dealt with?
so the populate if known.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's covered in our general conformance requirements, which we will talk about later in the session around suppressed data. But basically, if known does include the situation if allowed to share.
That's great. Thanks.
So we're looking for feedback on these. So these are a series of Confluence pages that have been developed for this. Again, the design principles are not going to go into publication. But if you've got any concerns that those design principles aren't appropriate, then please leave your comments on this particular page here. So if anyone can perhaps post that, or these will be available in the conformance page on the wiki. So for those that haven't got this already, this is the main conformance sessions page that we've got. And there are a link to each of these subpages. So the design principles are off here as well. So you can leave your inline comments or down the bottom, etc. So all the previous session recordings and sessions are on there. So moving on to the actor definitions. This is really just a revise of what we looked at last week. We did make a suggested change to the consumer where we were moving it from receives to consumes an AUPS bundle. But as part of publication, we've added an extra couple of items to each of those definitions, or an extra qualification. And in fact, it's an extra constraint. So these actors are based on the producer IPS actor and describes the additional requirements and documentation applied for the Australian context. So basically we're saying the AUPS producer is based on the producer IPS actor from IPS. That's hard to say. I really want to say IPS producer, but that's not how they've named them. So I'm trying to be proper. And similarly, on the consumer side, it is based on the consumer IPS actor. And you'll see how that gets applied in a moment. Any comments at this stage on this? Okay, so moving on to the producer then. And my color coding here, just for your reference, is basically it's new content that wasn't presented last week. That the black is what I pretty much presented last week. So we're going to focus more on the orange than the black. So AUPS producer shall comply with the requirements of the producer IPS actor and shall implement the AUPS bundle and composition and patient profiles. Then shall for each mandatory section in the AUPS composition implement the AUPS profiles referenced by the section entry, i.e. allergy, intolerance, AUPS condition, and either AUPS patient statement or AUPS medication request. So what does that actually look like in the IG? So section problem, as an example, has an obligation of shall populate. So that's basically telling us it's mandatory, other than the fact that it's also got a cardinality of 1-to-1. So we shall populate the problem section. And down at the entry level for problem, as an example, we have a shall able to populate. So shall able is indicating that we must populate this under some condition. There is a second should populate if known. So it is effectively an and. You shall populate under some condition and should populate if a value is known. So the second part is if you don't have a value, then you can opt out, but at some point you need to be able to demonstrate that you do populate it under some condition.
Quick
Danny?
clarification here. We inherit this from IPS, so we can't undo anything shown on the screen. It's what we get for being IPS conformant, basically.
And so what we're doing with these words is specifying these on our actor definition, basically giving a summary of what our conformance requirements are, and we're spelling out in narrative on that conformance producer conformance producer actor with what its conformance requirements are in words, but it's also reflecting what's in the profiles. The second part of this is around medication. So we've got this either or part of it. So that obviously medications is still a mandatory section, but in here we've got either medication statement or medication request being required. But from a producer's perspective, it's an either or. You can choose which one you implement.
Or both. We need to change that word. I've popped it in there and it's on the Confluence page. It's an at least one of. Because it's not a XOR.
Yeah. So have you actually changed that on the
Confluence page? Yes, I did. I changed it on the Confluence page and added an update comment, and I've changed that in the IG build so that it says and at least one of medication statement. Yeah.
Thank you. Everyone cool with that? Okay, so the next requirement is should for each recommended section in a UPS composition implement the profiles referenced by the section entry. So the recommended section entries are immunization, observation results, procedures. There's also a medical device. So as an example of that, we represent recommended resources, recommended sections using an obligation of should populate if known. And then within that section, we have an immunization that says shall populate if known. So,
No, we don't. It still says should. I don't think you updated the diagram.
oh, didn't I?
No.
No, I didn't.
That's a
Good. That's fine.
typo, guys.
Yep.
Sorry, that's my fault. When I was copying across the obligations from IPS, I just, yep, put shall there. So the minimum obligation we inherit for both of those is should populate if known for producers. We can choose to upgrade it, but yeah, it at the moment it says should. And if it doesn't, then I missed that typo that I really thought I fixed
Yeah,
yesterday.
no, that's me. I didn't. I think I've updated it down further, but not on this one. So let's have a look in here. So we're in a branch, conformance proposal branch. So allergies, medications, immunizations. We've got a should populate if known up there. So assuming that's should populate if known, so 2 levels of hierarchy here. You should populate if you know the immunization section. And if you populate the immunization section, then you should populate, if known, the immunization entry. Okay. So I see some acknowledgement that should is good.
Now let's just confirm that the difference between how the previous ones had shall on the profiles on the entries and where this has should means that this fully allows for people who can only ever build IPSs that can do narrative only immunization sections. And that's what that allows, and that's intentional from IPS. And so we've inherited these default ones, and I think part of the question on what we propose for ballot for comment, and I'm happy to put that out as like the IPS default, and then we can see what people's perspectives are. But is anyone feeling strongly that we do want to say no, we're not going to allow for narrative only here systems?
So Landon was sort of, how would you, if we strengthen this to shall, like is actually on the screen, what that would mean is if you implement the immunization, then you shall populate the immunization profile entry. How would that
Yeah.
concern you?
Well, it would mean that most of aged care couldn't actually use this because they don't have coded immunizations. Where they have immunizations.
You're very far away, Vince. Sorry, I'm struggling to hear you.
Oh, sorry. It would mean that most of aged care couldn't populate this because where they have immunizations, it's nearly always text at the moment. Coding is rare in aged care because they're not
Which
connected to the immunization registry, or many of them. They're starting to be, but many of them were not.
the profile does allow for just a text for your immunization, like saying rubella instead of coding it. But I do agree that I think that would still be a burden for them.
Well, it just mean they wouldn't be able to do it, which is not what we want.
Mm.
Might just
I- That's crazy. Sorry, just speaking that I would imagine there's a number of organizations that have already solved that problem. In terms of mapping your text into a 98% hit in a coding solution. So I think that would be one of the good messages to share amongst the group is to say if aged care sector has this issue, come on, who's doing this already?
Sure, but that's future work, and if you get that 2% wrong, it can be deadly.
Oh, yeah, no wrong, not kidding. Yeah.
I'll just go back a step. And just to reiterate, I guess the mandatory ones here. So on this same point, we're effectively saying here in the problems, for example, that not only shall you populate a problems section, but you shall populate a condition and entry.
If you're going to have a section that says, here's your problems, you better have one. That makes sense. Yeah.
Otherwise, you've got to basically say why it's empty. All right,
Otherwise, you have a
which is a
problem.
valid scenario, and we'll get into that one later. All right, so that's the clear distinction between the mandatory and the recommended. And then we've got optional sections or even undefined sections. So in principle, the IPS and AUPS, you can add additional sections that are not defined, as well as the optional ones. And what we're saying here is that there is you shall implement profiles referenced in the AUPS bundle. But if there is no AUPS profile specified, like is in this example, where it's just referring to a vital signs profile from the via base, that it is, you should use an AU core or an AU base profile where applicable. So you should use AU core blood pressure if you're representing a blood pressure in the vital signs section, which is optional. And you'll notice where I've pointed out the optional obligations, there is actually the way that we're representing optional, there is no obligation on the producer. So that's how that's being represented in obligations. I'll move on if there's no comments. Yep.
Clarify there. Does that mean that people could use, for instance, the international representation of blood pressure rather than the AU core one?
That's right. We're saying you should use the AU core one, but you don't have to.
It's going to make it difficult for receivers, I would have thought. But
I'm not too sure we're actually undoing that way. It's about implementing profiles. Because part of that is coming down to what we were really talking about being narrative only or not. And we're making clear that for optional and undefined sections, you don't have to have implemented any profile. You can be narrative only. Or in this circumstance, the section isn't requiring you to conform to certain things. I do think there's a separate point there. It's not dealt with in this set, and I don't want to try to solve it before ballot for comment because it's going to be tricky wording, but good catch. That with our requirement to be conformant to AU core, then theoretically what we're saying is if you send a structured blood pressure, then you've got to meet AU core's requirements for anything that AU core is covering. So that's not really handled by this level of requirement yet. And I think I'd like to try to close that gap up after ballot for comment, merely because we've really got 2 weeks to sort this wording.
And
And that's just
to
not
be
enough time
honest,
to do that well.
to back that up, this is the only place in AUPS where I could find profile that wasn't already well profiled,
Mhm.
either by an
I
IPS
could,
profile or an AUPS profile. So I really
can
struggled to
I
find an example.
ask then, what I could do as part of this proposal is from the AUPS bundle, which lists the recognized profiles, I could just list all the AU core vitals. That would close that gap up without us even having to do the wording, because it would implement the profile referenced in the bundle.
Mhm.
Would you leave the vital signs profile in the
Yes,
allowed list? Yeah.
I would, because the vital signs profile covers more vitals than AU core is profiled. So we would leave the parent profile there and then list the specific instantiations with the more specific rules. Yes.
Yeah, literally the vital signs profile is a generic profile to support any kind of vital sign. So yeah, cool.
So can I just check, what do people think? Should I do that? That I think would at least then have it referenced by the AUPS bundle.
That sounds reasonable.
All right,
Yeah.
I'll add those this afternoon.
And
Okay,
the other
great.
comment that I'll make, even though we've stated AU base profile, I couldn't find any reasonable AU base profile that wasn't already profiled as AU core, which isn't already AU PS. So kind of almost a mute point on that last item as well, the AU base, but at least
No, I think it's the or undefined. So it's where
true.
there's a
Yeah.
need for people to define a section that isn't yet handled. I think that's where that comes into play.
Yeah. And maybe even story might be in that space as well, because it basically generically references resource. Okay, so let's see if we can skip through these quickly. Shall implement the AUPS producer obligations defined in the implemented profiles. And where an IPS profile is referenced in the AUPS bundle, the obligations of the producer IPS actor shall apply. So that goes back to our very first point around the definition of AUPS producer, is that it is actually based on producer IPS. We're now leveraging that relationship to, in cases where we actually have an IPS profile. And here's an example of this. This is a patient profile. Oh, sorry, this is the first part of the cause. I'll come into the second part first, but basically with AUPS patient, we've got our obligations on AUPS. So identifiers shall populate if known. We've got a shall populate on name. We've inherited an obligation at the IPS level that says you shall populate a name on a patient, and we've got populate if known on telecom and gender. Now you'll notice, just from a rendering perspective, this is the differential view of the profile, that we've only got an obligation flag on the view. So if you moved the key elements, and this threw me yesterday, it's just the way the rendering is occurring, and that is actually valid because the differential is all we've changed are the obligations. But in the key elements table, we've actually got the must support that's been showing there. And you'll also notice that we've inherited actor obligations from AU core as well. So the key elements has got a lot of information there, right through to AU core obligations as well. Daniel.
That's temporary. So I'll just pop the thing in the Zulip chat for if anyone wants to participate in how do we kind of change that view. We're having a conversation now about how we I guess the mechanism we can use when we're creating IGs, that even though we inherit, or if we do multi-IG inheritance, that what gets rendered are only the actors relevant for the context. And so that's being discussed now. So feel free to join in. And while I don't think it's going to get done in time for ballot for comment, it should be for ballot for working standard. This should have been worked through, and I don't expect you'll see the AU core actors there.
I'm just going to throw something in here quickly. Sorry. A little bit of out of context here, but I just wanted to show you this next example, which is this. This is in the context of the consumer, but the section medical devices was the second part of this. And we've got, this is an IPS profile of device use statement IPS. So this is an example of where we are referencing an IPS profile, and hence the actual IPS profiles start to play a role in this particular case. So we've got shall populate if known on subject, timing, device, etc. For a producer IPS, which is what we have to comply with as a UPS consumer. The next couple is where we start to refer to suppressed data. Going back to your point, Vince, so we shall implement the requirements on a suppressed data when an element value is not allowed to be shared, and we shall implement the requirements on missing data when an element value is not known. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on if we get to it. If otherwise, we'll talk about it another day. Consumer. So I think pretty much this is the reverse now. So I'm going to skip through this pretty quickly. You shall implement the main resources, bundle, composition, patient. We've got shall for each mandatory section in the AUPS, implement the AUPS profiles referenced by the section entry. So what that now means is, as a consumer, you shall handle. It's not, it was a shall able to populate. It's for the producer, it is also a shall handle. And we've, as Landon talked about, we've got the should display on that as well. So you should display the patient problem resource in some form. I'll come back to that in a moment. So when we come to medication statement, it is an and. It's not at least one, like Danielle upgraded things to. It is actually, you as a consumer, you have to implement both. Any concerns there?
What is the actual definition of handle? Actually, could dig into that.
Yeah, I mean,
I've got a link. Let me pop it in. We've got it on our IG conformance page now for that, with a whole bunch of notes. Because essentially, it means, let me just find that link.
oh, I've got it on the screen.
In the chat now.
Display handle. So basically it is, it's pretty vague as it's describing, but basically you can't ignore it is what it means. You need to consider it, is some of the words that are being used. So you shall consider it. You can't just ignore it. And if you ignore it, you've at least considered it.
going to be
For
hard to do
example, there,
testing on
a
that.
child of handle is display. So just by displaying it, you could indeed meet the requirements for handle.
Yeah.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
How are you thinking that that could be handled in a formal conformance testing environment? People could say they're handling it because they considered it at design time, but don't actually implement it and yet satisfy the condition.
They would need to state how they've considered it and what the rationale is of ignoring it. And it might be simply the fact that it's not my use case. I'm just I'm using this patient summary to do some kind of decision support, and the scope of my decision support doesn't need to consider functional status. Oh, sorry, that's a bad example. Doesn't need to consider conditions. I don't know if that's ever possible when I'm considering allergies.
Just going to make any automated or semi-automated conformance testing a bit difficult.
Yeah, I don't think it's not
Hopefully,
possible,
we can
Vince.
push it, push that back to the international community because this is set at their level, right, for IPS, and every system and everyone trying to have a conformance scheme associated with this is going to have to answer that question. So, I mean,
And,
we're not going it alone, but yeah.
No, and yeah, I'm sure this has been considered considerable detail. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how they've handled that.
and it's actually derived from IPA. So with the IPS
Yeah.
is aligned with IPA. And yeah, I mean, when we talk about US Core, for example, they have a lot of non-testable, non-automated testing conformance requirements where they literally have to go through and ask questions.
Yeah,
How does your system handle this?
yeah, sure. There are always some of that. It's just going to make the whole of IPA more or
Yeah,
less.
but it's even worse now with this next one, Vince. Now we're talking about recommended
Yeah,
sections.
yeah.
Right, so now we're down to immunizations, but if an immunization is provided, then you still, as a consumer, shall handle.
Sure. Yeah.
And
Being a consumer is really difficult.
yes,
All of it.
absolutely. But in the case of IPS, as Danielle said, just by simply displaying it, you've handled it. If you're not a viewer, then you're in trouble. Okay, so shall implement the AUPS consumer obligations defined in all the implemented profiles. So that's a reverse of what we talked about before. So again, now each individual item. So in the case of patient, we've got handle, handle, handle. So any must support element needs to be
Heath,
handled.
we're only
Yeah.
seeing the that table. Yeah, now, yep, got it.
Sorry, I'm looking at a different screen. So this is where with the second point of that, if you're a UPS consumer and you're having to handle a IPS device use statement as an example, which is the only example that's in here at the moment, then you shall handle its obligations as a consumer IPS. So moving towards missing data and suppressed data. So you shall consume resources containing must support elements with missing data or suppressed data. And what about optional sections? So at the moment we are silent on obligations for optional sections. So you can see down the bottom, oh, sorry, optional section entries. So we've got obligations on optional sections, but there is only obligations on the consumer. There is no obligation on the producer. They don't need to populate it. But when we get down to the entry, there is no obligations on anyone. So that's kind of assumed or implies that they are a may. But you'll notice we've been talking about the structured data all through, but there is an obligation on the text within an optional section. So right up the top, all sections have a obligation on the text element, which has an obligation of shall populate if known for a producer and shall handle on the consumer. So what we're just asking whether we, in the context of defining our conformance requirements for our actors, in our actor definitions, whether we need to state anything about the conformance requirements for optional sections. We feel that we don't. And
You mean
again,
for emptiness?
no,
Because
just
we did literally see on the screen one about something about optional and undefined sections.
that was for the not for the consumer.
Okay.
I didn't hear anything. So you've got an opportunity again to provide us some feedback. So all of that's documented in not only the conformance page for you to review, and there is some markup here. But that's summarized pretty much, and that's those two sections there, what we've just been through. So if you've got any further comments, you're welcome to do so there. If you want to actually see what it looks like in the conformance page, in the actual IG itself, we've got, that's how it manifests itself in the IG. So that's the set of conformance requirements for the consumer. And then we've got a set of conformance requirements in the producer. And this is where okay.
Yeah, I stepped up the formatting clearly. Let me pop onto that right now.
That's all right.
Producer.
I'm also more looking at this, and in the producer, you don't have the
At least one up.
at least one. Yeah.
No, I updated it in the Confluence page. Let me go have a look.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's producer. Right. I'll pop that in right now.
So we've got it in the yep, there we go. At least one in the Confluence page. Okay, so emptiness. Now what do we got? 15 minutes. Perfect. Emptiness. So there's, in IPS, there's a number of degrees of emptiness. And I think Danielle had some interesting interpretation of emptiness when we were talking about this. So for mandatory sections, you can state an empty reason. It's an explicit statement that why this section is empty. So keep in mind what we're talking about here is when we talk about empty, we're talking about the entry element being an empty list within the section. And we're talking about mandatory sections. So we're talking about problems, allergies, medications. We're talking about the entries within them that are shall populate or shall able to populate from an obligation perspective. If you're not if you don't have any data, we're talking about how do you explicitly state why you don't have data. So there is an empty reason element, and there is a constraint that says if on these three sections only, the mandatory ones, that if that entry element is empty, you must have an empty reason. So either one of them have to be in the instance for these three sections. So you can explicitly state something like not asked or unavailable. You can actually populate a section with a known X. So if it's an allergy, you can say it's known allergy or known problems as a conditioned resource in the case of problems, as a allergy intolerance resource if it's a known allergy, and also similar with the medication statement, known medications. IPS has also suggested that you can create an entry condition within a problem section with a SNOMED code of no information. And I would argue, how does this compare with missing data and our data absent reasons? So just something to consider here.
It were but not applicable, sorry, Yanni.
It's not an option in the...
I don't think that's possible because you've got a patient. It would be saying it's not applicable to ever have information about allergies. And I think all humans are people who could be at some point susceptible to an adverse reaction. So I don't think, at least for mandatoriness, you could use not applicable because that would be false.
Not so much for allergies, as I agree with you completely there. But there would be potentially sections where there may be exactly the kind of answer.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, so outside of the mandatory sections, if, for example, a women's health section was specified and someone did not identify was biologically relevant for them, then something like not applicable, sure. I'm not so sure there are any currently defined sections that applies to, but yeah.
So the mandatory sections are problems, allergies, and medications. Anything else recommended and optional and undefined sections, we're basically saying omit. Or actually IPS says omit. You may omit, Danielle.
Yeah, I was going to say that unlike, I think the one of the things that I wanted to check here before we put this out for tweaks is that around emission at a section level, which is different to element stuff, we've got rules in our core about that. I think it's a recommendation, noting, of course, that downstream IGs might have made certain sections mandatory. So it's within your use case, if this section isn't mandatory, I think they should be omitting. But now I'm going to open that up to the floor to people. Obviously, we can't omit mandatory sections.
Can I just go through a couple more items before we go through that? Is that all right? All right, so obviously mandatory sections, the minimum cardinality, you've got to either have entries or an empty reason. As far as not applicable is concerned, this is the full list of empty reasons. So it's nil known, not asked, withheld, unavailable, not stated, closed. But we see these as very much explicit assertions. Take the first one, clinical judgment that there are no known items for this list after a reasonable investigation. Even something like not asked, it is someone is making the statement that they were not asked. They've been withheld for privacy reasons. Even this unavailable, which could be literally interpreted as a technical thing that they're not available. The example they've given us here is that they're unavailable because the patient is unconscious. So we still see these as more clinically orientated, clinically relevant concepts, not technical things just to work around the problem that we've got no data.
What's the difference between nil, known then, and unavailable at that point?
Very good question.
That would be where a system, so the difference between nil known and anything else is where the system actually has something recorded. So you would use nil known where you don't have anything. There's a mandatory section, you've got to populate something. If you've got data in your system and it's like patient is currently unconscious and that's how you've mapped that, then you've got something that's mapped across.
So the nil known's defined as a clinical judgment that there are none known.
Oh, whoops, not that one. Yeah, I was thinking
Unavailable.
yeah.
Unavailable, and that's the one that I think potentially is potentially misuse, because I still think that these are intended to be clinically relevant. Someone
Yes,
is
because
making an assertion.
the recommendation, just to clarify what I should have said, is nil known is not recommended for use either by IPS, and it conflicts with AU Corps advice in US Corps and so forth, and some wide patterns in fire. I would very muchly recommend we continue down the pathway that seems to be what is in the international fire specs as well as our local fire specs, of having a resource that says things like no known allergies or no current medications.
And that's where we get to in our recommendation. So just very quickly, for the non-mandatory ones, currently IPS says may be omitted. It doesn't explicitly say that it shall be admitted. It may be omitted. And I know that I think Marika talked about wanting to populate something in these non-mandatory sections. So that's why I've raised this question. Can we put it in an empty reason in a non-mandatory section? So something to consider. And obviously, if there are assertions about absence, I mean, this is a bad example, but the no known allergy scenario, it does talk about that particular scenario. However, IPS does recommend the use of empty reason over that. And then
it does not.
It does.
Really?
Yes, it is
I was
recommended.
copying and pasting the words this afternoon, I thought, and I thought it said to do no known allergies over section empty reason.
No. So it says it recommends the use of empty reason, but you may use the absence entry. And then it also says if you're actually using an entry, there's no information available. So basically what we're pointing out here is there's ambiguity in the IPS, and what we would like to firm that up a little bit.
I'm just going to lift and shift the content out of the IPS in there. That reads to me like they recommend using the SNOMED code for no known allergies. As I said, prior versions of IPS included a thing for doing that, and that's not recommended for use anymore.
There's another paragraph.
Yeah, but not having information about a particular section is a different circumstance to knowing that a patient has no known current allergies. They are different things.
I agree.
So it is recommended when a source system does not have information about the empty reason element be populated.
And I would still agree with that, while saying if you have it recorded, like when I have to get admitted to hospital or something, it asks you, do you have any allergies? You can fill out in some cases, I don't have any, and that's recorded. In that case, you would actually be representing then the no known allergies. If a system has no information it's drawing from, then absolutely use empty reason. They're different circumstances. One is the source system has nothing, and the other is it does.
Anyway.
I agree with Danielle's interpretation.
And effectively that's in line with what I'm recommending as well, is that we really should be using, if I'm interpreting correctly, we should be using the entry for these three sections.
Let's say in the circumstance that I think Yoni, Marika, and I are on the same page, and let me try and draft it this afternoon and send that out, and we can get the tweaking right. That we've got those two different things. My system has nothing about allergies, and the one where it is actually recorded somewhere, no known allergies, and we've got different pathways. Emptiness, the system has nothing, is system empty reason. Sorry, section empty reason. A statement of no known allergies is in the allergy intolerance resource. That's, I think, what we are recommending. And I would, do we say should? Because I
No,
think we have to say
at the
should
moment,
instead of shall, or.
what I've got is may, right? So on
Mm.
the screen, sorry, I'm covering the screen again. I've got may here. I'm more than happy to move this to should.
I think we should say should. I think we should provide the guidance that that's
Mm.
how we want this to be
And,
supplied.
and for me, it
I would
aligns.
agree with you guys. I think should, for allergy specifically and for mandatory sections, it's either you know that you have no medications, or we don't know any information and therefore we can't populate it. But
Mm-hmm.
those are very different responses.
And I think it aligns with AU Core because we've got all these recommendations around representing no known allergies and medications and problems in AU Core, and we're leveraging that within AUPS. I think it absolutely aligns, and it's only if it's finally empty because we can't do the no known explicit statement where we have to fall back to empty reason.
I'm in agreement. Just a quick question around the preferred binding for empty reason for allergy intolerance. Because is that a different set, the no known allergy versus, I'm just wondering about the terminology for this and handling.
Oh, like if in the circumstance where you've actually got something recorded where you know there are no known allergies for the patient, it's the same code as in AU Core. It's a different thing at a section level if we're going to use section empty reason for those sections because you don't have anything in your system. That's where it's it's
a list empty reason value set.
Yeah.
So it includes all of those SNOMED codes in the NCTS value set on allergy intolerance code.
Okay. Yeah.
And
I was just
that's
looking at
basically what by populating these explicitly, entry is no longer empty, hence we don't have to worry about empty reason.
Okay.
So empty reason really just comes as a last resort. So we're at time. I think that was a really good outcome. So we didn't cover missing data, but that's really not very special. We're basically just adopting AU Core, and in fact, we're looking to lift and shift or simply reference AU Core mandatory data, missing data rules. So again, feedback please on these requirements. Once again, that's the page. We're talking about this page now. So we've got conforming to, is that the right one?
Let's actually just send out an email this afternoon, Heath. When if you've got time, we'll go through that and try and just wordsmith it the way I think we've got the clear direction out of this meeting on how to go with some of that emptiness. And then flick out the email when we're like, right, we've wordsmithed it now.
Yep.
Have a look. Yep.
So hopefully this kind of, as I'm scrolling through, looks familiar to what I've just presented in the page, including a list of those obligations, etc. So I have put it already out in Zealot, but we can send it out as an email.
I just thought that since some of what we've been talking about isn't actually in the Confluence page, that it'd be easier for people if we alerted them when we'd gone and made some of the changes from today.
Mm-hmm. So is email preferred over Zulip?
Oh, I prefer Zulip. Is everyone else okay with us just saying on Zulip, hey, it's now what we think is up to date, go have a look?
Oh, I suppose everyone's different. I'm an email man myself.
I don't keep Zulip up all the time.
And just to this group, are you looking at, Danielle, or are you going to go to the broader group?
I think for the one we're talking about this afternoon, just probably this group, although whatever we'll need to, because it's a topic for next Thursday's AU Core TDG, they're going to get a notification of the proposal
Yep.
via that kind of here's next meeting's agenda on
Yep.
Monday.
Yeah, so we'll go out to this specific list.
Mm.
Okay, good. Did you want to talk about next steps? I mean, we basically next meeting is in 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Final review was the plan, but you seem to be pulling this a little bit quicker by presenting it to the group next week. So how do you see the next
Which
2-week meeting going?
Well, I think we have to socialize it. So the schedule has always been that it goes to 2 meetings of the AU Patient Summary Fire IG Call. Putting something big in front of people and thinking that we'll get it done in 1 meeting is delusional. So even 2 meetings, we'll see how we go. We'll get with the goal to get enough agreed that we've got a minimum set of direction that's clear enough to the community on where we're trying to go. And then we can fix things through the ballot for comment. So we need a macro overall position on what are the things we're caring about, what are we inheriting from IPS and AU Core, and is there anything else we need to direct people's attention to, basically. And so far, it's looking like we're just being clearer around preferred ways to handle no known X and emptiness. So I'm going to put out an initial one because we haven't had enough time to go through some of the things today, so that we can get any feedback that people really want to incorporate before it is shown at the Friday call to the AU Patient Summary Fire IG call. That'll be the first bit in where we start to walk through the conformance profile, get initial feedback. And then in our next call in this group, I think part of that will be getting the feedback from that a wider call that we had, and trying to work through that to finalize the proposal to come back for voting for inclusion in the ballot for comment draft.
Can I maybe just ask a question? How does everyone feel about what we've got, what's been presented the last 4 or 5 weeks, and where we've landed so far, ready to go to the meeting next week for socialization?
I think we will have an opportunity to disagree if we did disagree. So I think there should be general agreement, but that doesn't necessarily mean the wider group will follow that.
No problem here.
I think you're demonstrating a good position, and so that's the key anyway, right? We're creating a standard. How do we comply with a standard? And so there's, people have to understand that and recognize those things that are happening.
Marika?
I tend to agree. I think we've sort of
That's
landed on consensus, at least before we go to ballot.
Same here.
That's great. Well, thank you very much. The work is somewhat justified given that feedback, so thank you.
No, thanks, Heath. You've been doing a
Great
fab
job. I
job.
got to run. See ya.
No, I think it's actually really, really critical work because it means that people who've implemented the International Patient Summary know exactly, how much additional work they're going to have to do. So.
All right. Thank you very much.